Welcome, everyone, to the Culinary Now podcast. My name is Matthew Britt.
And I'm Jamie Schick.
And today on the pod, we're joined by Robert Aguilera. Robert is a El Paso, Texas native. He has a bachelor's degree from Boston University School of Hospitality. He's had several roles in his career, from barista to cheesemonger, which I definitely want to get into in a little bit, to his current role with Novonesis. Robert, do me a favor. Tell us more about you and what your role at Novonesis is and what we're talking about today.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this. I really love the opportunity to share. And quite frankly, that's my entire career has kind of been about that. And if I wanted to even go even further back, as a kid growing up in El Paso, had, multiple cousins, like over 40, combined on both sides of my family. And we had an acre and a half of land where people would come over every weekend and we'd have barbecues, hang out together. And it was always my role as a kid, about 10 and above, to help cook, help clean, help serve, help hang out, have fun. But then in the end of the night, clean up again and then get everybody home if necessary. So being a part of that and that memory was so tangible in my mind when I went to my first year in architecture school. Realized as much as I love drawing, as much as I love that idea of designing things, I really wanted to still have that feeling of what I had growing up, which is being able to help create something that can be enjoyed. And then at the end of it, you collect everyone, get everybody home safely, and maybe you do it again. So that really kind of made it easy for me to make the jump to the hospitality world, because that's what it's all about. It's about the experience that you give to the customer that's going to your restaurant, going to your hotel, or going anywhere else you're providing a service. And the main thing I really enjoyed about that experience of growing up and then also getting into the culinary or the hospitality world was really the chance to meet people and to experience time with them and to maybe form a bond with them and maybe even grow together in some way. And so that's what got me into the hospitality world as far as educationally, but it also got me into Starbucks because I needed coffee for free, because which is very necessary in college. But I've been drinking coffee since I was 6, thankfully to my mother, and because she thought it would help me with a breathing problem that I had, and lo and behold, she just got me hooked on it, and I've never looked back. So it's been a part of my life ever since. And the thing that I learned most from that time with Starbucks, at the time, they were doing cupping. So they were actually doing true training of where beans came from and how the flavors in those beans derived from the place where they came from all over the world and how they were different. And being able to recognize that was really a mind-blowing thing for me. I didn't realize that there's something to that. And part of that was also fermentation. And so naturally, my question in my mind is always why? Why does something taste this way? Why is it grown there in that fashion to elicit what it does in my cup? I want to know more. And so got really thirsty for more information. Burned myself out at Starbucks, was working too much, became an assistant manager, wanted to become a manager, but didn't make it, and took a step back and tried to reassess as to what I wanted to do. Thought I wanted to get out of food, but quickly realized I can't get out of food. And the thing that turned it for me was, luckily, my wife, or my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, got us to Martha's Vineyard to stay at the youth hostel out of Martha's Vineyard for a week. And I had luckily just picked up the paperback edition of Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. And of course, reading through that book, all those experiences I had already by that time, or similar ones to it, and just felt like I can't get out of the culinary hospitality world. There's something about that. And it's really just because I want to know more. I want to know more about people and cultures and why things taste the way that they do. And I want to share it as well. And so came back from that trip. Luckily, I knew somebody in catering who was running a shop that was called the Seasonal Table in Boston. And they had a cheese counter. And the man who was leading it was going to be leaving in 9 months. And I was asked, could you learn everything about cheese in a year? And I said, what's there to know about cheese? And that was 2000. And I'm still learning. And that it kicked it all off. And that led me to, again, working at Formaggio Kitchen in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and getting into not just the sales, but also the procurement and the figuring out of where things came from. We go on those trips, we get to find products and then find the way to bring them back to the United States. And I got to do a lot of that importation. but also got a lot of actual production, or got to see a lot of productions being made, and quickly realized the way things taste really has to do with not just the place that they're from, but the process they go through and the culture that's built around it as far as people, and how it actually creates a system, an ecosystem that can't not produce that product. So if I take you to Reggio Emilia and we just gather milk from cows that are there, we throw it into a pot and we put it over heat, get it to 100 degrees, and then we start trying to, stir it a little bit, you're already on the way to making Parmigiano Reggiano. There's other steps that are going to have to go into place to make it complete and make it good, but you're not that far off, because the entire place, the system, the way it's been moving, the way that entire miasma, that ecosystem has been existing, can't not support the cultures, the enzymes, the life that goes into it, the grass that grows from where the cows are eating. All of that feeds into it. So all you are doing is really, in those places, you are a shepherd. And that's my favorite thing to talk about, and we'll get into it today, about fermentation, is that fermenting professionals are not chefs, they are shepherds. They're trying to gather all this life and put it through a process and trying to get it from this paddock to that paddock, and trying to do it in a consistent manner to hopefully have a similar consistent outcome. The fact that anything is made consistently in the fermentation world is actually a little bit of a magic trick, but it has little to do with secrets. It has more to do with consistency. And being able to witness that and being able to understand it, and then eventually going back to school. At the time, the University of Vermont had the Vermont Institute for Artisan Cheese, and being able to make cheese there and understand. Great teacher in Mark Gerard, who's a part of the cheese world in a very large way, really got to understand the care and the patience you have to have when you talk to fermentation professionals. And it's not that far off from the customers you serve, whether it be in a restaurant, at a coffee bar counter, at a cheese counter. All of it goes back to the way that you listen to your customer and what they're trying to tell you, and the information you need to give them either a response in a product or a solution or some sort of support. And that's my favorite thing to be a part of. It's the way not just to create new things, but to make the things that are already created even better. And how can we support that in some way? So in essence, the company I work for now, Novonesis, we do sell starter cultures. We do sell enzymes for fermentation food production, and also for other types of fermentation outside of the food world as well. But the main thing that we do is not just drop off a product at a customer and then leave. We maybe sell them this product that went through a lot of benchtop tests to plant trials to then, after the first sale, support on site for as long as they keep buying from us. And a lot of it is continually trying to optimize the way that they produce and trying to help them. Many of the things we end up helping with have little to do with our products, but more to do with their process. And ultimately, by them attending to their process, not by what we tell them to do, but what we kind of recommend, when they make their changes and it supports their process a little bit better, it in part also supports our cultures, our enzymes to work in a more efficient manner. So it's, again, the partnership that's really important.
So I love everything you just said, and I thought that was such a beautiful way to say that all. And I can't wait to dive deeper into some of those topics. And in my career, I've dabbled in very surface level fermentation. Like I never got into using cultures or enzymes because they intimidated me. So I'd like to start at the beginning with what even is a culture and an enzyme when we are talking about fermentation.
Yep. So the main thing we talk about with, as far as starter cultures, is you're taking it down to a bacteria. So something that can consume food and produce an outcome in an anaerobic, so no oxygen environment. That's the first place we start with that world. There's also the aerobic bacteria or starter strains. Some of them are mold, some of them are yeast, and they require oxygen to make their work happen and populate more of themselves and elicit an outcome depending on what it is. Go ahead. Yep. And I would say, though, if you think about it that way, where you have an anaerobic and an aerobic sort of set of players, think about it the way the Earth actually developed, the way that it settled with an ocean full of salt, and then oxygen suddenly starting to creep into the environment above that and populating it more. So you have CO2 and oxygen kind of propelling themselves. In those two environments, these building blocks of life really thrived and figured out how to make this work and create a symbiotic relationship between the two. So you're always trying to understand the circumstances that make these things work. But ultimately, it's air and salt and water. If you want to think about the main things for fermentation, those are the things you're most concerned with at the beginning, just to understand, what do I have? What am I giving it? And what temperature also is everything going into? And you can make a lot of things change or stay the same depending on the temperature and the way you pay attention to the fermentation. The main thing that happens to fermentation, of course, is acidity is what builds. And we're trying to build acidity to create safe food for as long as possible. Because if I had a cow and I were taking milk from that cow every day, I probably couldn't drink all of it that day. Maybe I could. Maybe my family could drink it. But what if we got 2 cows? Now we have more, and we can't drink all of that in one day. So you need to do something with that extra milk, and you want to make it last. So you start thinking about, how do we preserve that? And again, the knowledge of salt and being able to use that along with water in some way, and taking things through a process of slow observation in that salty environment to figure out, is it okay? Is it not? What's showing up? We don't want that. That makes me feel weird. I need to figure out how to fix that. Maybe we need to put it into a vessel that's closed more often than it's open, so we don't have as much oxygen. We'll do that. Maybe we don't put as much water. Maybe we put more salt. So that happens in survival of our species over, thousands of years. But through that understanding, it gets passed down, and it's pretty. You can repeat it as much as possible and get so many different outcomes, but you're kind of within a range of acceptable, which is, it's going to feed me, it's not going to hurt me, we can do it again, and I can teach somebody how to do it. So the main thing is these building blocks. They've existed for a long time, much longer than we have. We're just here to shepherd them into the way that makes them happy and makes us happy at the same time. And the other piece, though, is enzymes. And I know you've asked that too. And enzymes are really precision tools that actually get into whatever environment they get put into to elicit a change. And they can do it a lot faster than a bacteria or a fungus or a yeast can do so. They can make that change that you need happen a lot quicker.
So that's so interesting. It's like basically a crash course in like fermentation 101, which I love. I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned something earlier that like people that do fermentation really well basically excel in consistency, right? And I would imagine that with sort of wild or natural cultures and enzymes, there was always going to be some level of inconsistent, sort of looming there.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how, sort of synthetic cultures and enzymes plays a role in kind of the greater fermentation, world today? Is it still kind of the Wild West where people are getting natural cultures, enzymes to do their ferments? Or do the people that we maybe associate fermentation with, like, these sort of high-end restaurants, are they using more synthetic cultures because of that desire and that need for consistency?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And quite frankly, the wild fermentation, it sounds scary, but it can be consistent. It can be done in such a manner that you elicit a consistency that's within a range where if I had to give it an amplitude, it's kind of a bigger wave where there can be bigger swings of everything's great to bigger swings of everything's bad. And it goes back and forth, but it's all experience-based to get it into a more sustainable, consistent rhythm around what you're accepting. Synthetic cultures kind of take the existing makes, and this is where the modern kind of the way we understand of purchasing culture, starter cultures, came from, which is the company that is a part of Novonesis, that was kind of a part of a merger, is Christian Hansen. That's the company that hired me first in 2019. The man who started it, Christian Hansen, did this in the late 1800s in Denmark. And partially his work got started because the farmers around him who were making cheese, or the cheesemakers around them who were making it, had a lot of inconsistency in the enzyme, the coagulant that they were using, where sometimes the coagulant would work and then sometimes it wouldn't. So Christian Hansen decided, well, what if I take all of the vels, which are the fourth stomach of a calf, from this area and process them, because you have to dry them and then you have to cut them and then you have to create a liquid that will take the enzyme out specifically, and then you standardize it and then send it back to you so that whenever you use a certain amount of this coagulant, it will give you the same gel coagulation. It'll give you the same moisture capture. It'll give you the same fat capture. What if we could do that? Now, it didn't go into detail as much as I just want this coagulant to work every time. So by doing that, by taking that part of the cheesemaking process away from the inconsistency or the wild possibilities, created a consistency that more cheese producers could rely on. And therefore, they kept asking, hey, I want more. And so it built a business pretty quickly. And eventually, the next question was, well, we have to make starter cultures. And we do it in a yogurt base. And we're constantly feeding the yogurt, just like you would feed a bread starter culture every day with fresh dough, or fresh flour and fresh water. And you mix it all and you kind of punch it down and then you give it some air, you don't give it some air, whatever it is. Instead of doing that, what if I were to take that starter that you have, bring it to our place and try to understand how to replicate the strains that are in there in a very controlled way and try to grow them up, capture them, and then blend them into a combination that every time I give it back to you and you use it in your production, it'll elicit, again, the same acidity drop in the same amount of time that you need and give you the flavor, the texture, the functionality, whatever it is that you need. So that was the second part of what Christian Hansen did. And it was so successful that by 1890, they moved their production, or they actually created a new production in New York State, because production was going crazy at that time, more people coming into the country, and actually got an island in the Mohawk River in upstate New York. And it was renamed Christian Hansen Island. And it was there that the rennet and the starter cultures started to get made for production in New York State. So, and then from there, it went to Milwaukee. After that, when they had more people showing up in the Midwest, and you had a lot more people from Germany, from Switzerland going there. So it became what really drove a lot of people to move their traditional productions of their products to a more almost modern industrial way of doing it and feed more people and create a business in the United States. So by doing that, you're not taking away the wild capabilities or the positive, the benefits that you get from wild fermentation, but you're trying to create something that you can rely on. And one of the things that I do like to talk about as far as reliability is we have a modern standard for cleaning and sanitation. And before that, when cheese in particular, or any fermentation was being done, if it were being made in a quote unquote vessel, a vat of some kind, it was probably made in wood or some sort of metal like copper. Well, you don't always have access to metals, but you had a lot of access to wood. So more wood was used for barrels that were used for that creation of any product. And when you use wood, that's a porous material. And every time you put raw milk into it, you're seeding it with whatever microbe load came with that milk. So could you ever get that wooden barrel clean? No, there's no real clean. But could you get it consistent? Yes, you could get it consistent by making batches every day, over and over. And that consistency did go up and down throughout the seasons. But ultimately, you could rely on that barrel as your starter. You could rely on it giving you the consistency that you needed. But once you take that away and you find, hey, the folks in Italy who are using copper for their kettles for Parmigiano Reggiano, they have a lot more control over it in larger volumes. You don't really have that in wood. We should use more metal. And metal, of course, the Industrial Revolution brings a lot more metal to it, so we should use more of that. Stainless steel comes into it. It's a little bit cheaper, maybe even more reliable. Maybe it doesn't also add a flavor. It's also easier to take care of as opposed to copper is over time. So you start doing that, but now you don't have the same microbe load being built inside of a vat. So now you have to be concerned with any invading characters that could come into this. Because before, when you had a robust, I want to call it immune system inside of that wooden barrel, now you don't have it in that stainless steel or copper vat. So you have to be concerned with whatever goes in. If there's something that's invading, it can have equal footing sometimes to take over the existing starter cultures that were in the raw milk. So sometimes you get a lot more swings. So it's a tough one, but ultimately, the way things have gone, it's gone kind of back and forth. And we're kind of at a point where adding more life, more microbes to existing productions is really helpful. But with the modern cleaning system, it's great. It gives us more opportunity to make new products or make more consistent products in higher volume. But it also means we have to be more aware of those that are invading and those that are existing that we put in to these vats. And that's a big thing that we're concerned with all the time. Because as I said, our company, when we make culture strains, we do actually make them in a way that's similar to what our producers do. We have vats where we do have the starter strain and we give it the food that it needs. If it's for, of course, dairy making, it's lactose based. So they continue to eat that lactose and then make copies of themselves. And once we get to a certain cell amount, that what is in the vat gets put through a liquid nitrogen process and makes these little dipping dot looking pieces. That's what ends up going into a culture bag. They need to be kept at -40 to keep that shape, but they're captured in that format so that they can either be sold as individual strains or they can be put into blends of different starter cultures depending on where that starter culture is going to go for what production it's going to be made into. But the main thing that I tell everybody too is we're using stainless steel vats. And the biggest part about this process is not the creation in the vat. It's what happens after it. It's the cleaning that we do. And we have to clean these vats to the extent that if there's any protein left after the final rinse, which we do test for, that whole system has to get cleaned again because protein can then lead to something that we are always after in the fermentation world to try to keep at bay, which is called phage, which is a virus. And it's a virus that's specific only to lactic acid bacteria. So, and they're everywhere. Just like a virus that we get infected with, a little virus can get into a cell of a starter strain and it can make copies of itself faster than that individual bacteria can make a copy of itself. But when that virus gets in and makes those little copies, eventually it bursts out of the cell and it starts to infect other cells around it. So one thing that can happen is if you're not cleaning well in your production of a fermentation made food product, you can actually create more existence of this virus for that strain that you're putting into your production, that when you do that, eventually the next amount of milk you put into a vat, the virus will infect quickly and stop all the fermentation from happening. Your acidity doesn't drop anymore. You've lost that entire batch of milk and you probably can't use that culture strain anymore and you have to take it out. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, part of what we do is not just sell drop-off product and then walk away. We support ongoing all the time. And we're always receiving, we're always trying to make sure that our cultures are ahead of the game and always being kept well. And if ever there's an issue at a customer, we go in to try to support them to make this situation better for their cultures to produce and for their production to actually go through all the way to the end.
Now, I think you kind of answered my question, but as you were talking about this, I'm thinking about, and it sounds like you have some great internal ways that you're regulating health and safety and you're catching things before they become a problem. But do you also work closely with the health department or need any special processes license for fermenting or for working with these cultures? So on either side of it?
Um, well, we don't work closely with them, but of course we're always met with regulations that we have to match up to. Our products have to match up to. The main thing is in our cultures, in when we have a specification for them, that they always meet what they should, and we have to test all the time to ensure they're doing what they should in process. They're going to work for the customer that's buying them, but also that they meet their regulations that they need, whether it's for organic or it's for meeting a GMO non-GMO required project. And then as far as health departments are concerned, a lot of it has to do not with them directly, but through the customers. When they are met with their own health departments and the health department comes in to look at what's going on and they have questions, we can support that. We can support with any questions they may have, and also processes. We can recommend you clean a certain way, you use this product to clean as opposed to that product. But it's never a forced issue. It's always up to the customer to decide what they want to do. But we're there to support them in all of that as much as we can.
So how does that work with sort of like the average chef kind of now purchasing product from you guys or from whomever, and then like, because work happens at the restaurant, right? So they take your product and then they now do something with it, right? Do they then absorb the ownership of the safety of that item, or how does Novonesis kind of, you mentioned like can kind of continuously support? How do they kind of coach, maybe an emerging chef on how to properly use these products, knowing where the line is and not to exceed? Because you're right, no one wants to get sick.
Correct. And ultimately, we create the product to then get sold and be purchased and brought in. And it's with good faith that our product is delivered and it's going to give you the actual cell growth, the actual, hopefully the flavor and the texture that you're looking for, if it has that capability. But then it's really on the purchaser to then take ownership from there through their process and all of their cleaning involved. So whatever environment they create, they need to square that away with their health department as to what they're doing, how they're making sure everything is safe, and then how they're capturing it, storing it, using it after the fact, and what are their checks. We don't work directly with a lot of chefs in particular. We do have a lot of our products end up going through a lot of distributors, and some of our freeze-dried products, I would imagine, are used more by the culinary side because they're a little bit easier to handle. They do not need to be kept at negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They can be kept at a traditional freezer temperature or even a refrigerator temperature as well. But whenever the end user has a question, if their distributor can't help them or give them a little bit of guidance, we can certainly get that question and then try to help as well. To give you an understanding too, we mentioned Formaggio Kitchen before, and Formaggio Kitchen does store cheeses that they purchase and bring in an environment that's a little bit warmer than a refrigeration temp, but it's correct for those cheeses that they have. And it's all about the cleanliness. It's all about the consistency with which they rotate things in and out, the way that they handle them. That's important. And then if ever they need someone to come and look at it, we're happy to give our 2 cents and to give them an understanding of what they need to be aware of. And if a health inspector that they are working with had a question, then we could be brought in to give a little bit of guidance as well as to what we see, why certain things work, give some documentation as well as far as what's available in the science community in white papers as well, to say this has been done for multiple centuries and it's also been tested at multiple universities all over the world. And here's the information, if we have questions, or what is the proper way that you would see as a health inspector these products being handled, but it still is beneficial to the actual vendor of those products in the end, where they want them to develop in a certain way. So it's a much more supportive coach role at that point, but we can certainly be brought in for that.
No, it's an interesting conversation, and it's one that I think it might scare people from doing it entirely kind of in-house. They might outsource some of their products, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention obviously the flavor potential that exists with some of these fermented products. I mean, obviously we don't need to go down the list of the fermented things we use on the daily basis that people maybe don't appreciate, but from a sort of gastronomy world where people are always trying to innovate and to push flavor and to strengthen flavor development, I mean, it really does play such a critical role in elevating cuisine, right? And
Absolutely.
I just think about all the applications that are out there. I was curious, kind of in your work, whether it was as a cheese monitor, as a barista, now sort of working on kind of the production side. Are there examples of where Novonesis or just you personally have seen success Like, where are some really great, highlights of where fermented foods have kind of risen in the past, let's say, 10 years?
Yeah, and what I do love is the emergence of this like wild fermentation that's happened over, say, the last decade. There was the Boston Fermentation Festival that was going on for a while, and it was great to meet people like Sandor Katz and all the folks who were doing their own fermentation that you weren't even aware of was happening all over just the state, like of Massachusetts in particular. But ultimately, the thing that I look to for fermentation is a depth of flavor. And I think there's an authenticity in that depth that when it hits you, you just recognize it. It makes you swoon, and it makes you realize I feel like I've tasted this before, but not to this extreme. It makes me feel alive for some reason, and I don't know why. I need to try it again. That feeling, I've had it multiple times, whether it was from a cheese made somewhere or from a fermented vegetable made somewhere, whatever it is. And when you recognize it, it's that feeling. And then my obvious next question, which is, why did that happen?
Yeah.
How did that happen? And can we do it again? So with me, when I talk to, especially a lot of my work after retail, when I got into supporting the trade, was with artisans. And it was to work with artisans to help them develop their products, mostly cheese and fresh dairy. But what I realized was when a cheese making customer would come to me and say, I tried this cheese in France, or I tried this cheese in Italy, and I'd like to try to get close to making that again. Could you help me? That is what really got me excited when I started learning about Christian Hansen cultures at the time, because the information I was getting from just the spec sheets from it helped me understand when I could look up those strains, just the family of strain names, and to where they originated in Europe. I could look to, that cheese was made with something similar. I think we can put those together and try it out. And I could, at the beginning, maybe made a lot more mistakes, but was forgiven for it because many of the products sold anyway. So that was good for the end producer. But as I've continued to learn more and more about them, it's really just going back in history to understand where certain strains thrived to then try to get them in combinations that will work. And so I would say we're in a state right now in the artisan world, whether it's in vegetable or in dairy, for example, or even in meats as well. We're in a really good state because there's a lot more freedom, there's a lot more creativity, and a lot more risk taking that's calculated, not wild. And I think some of the best people who do it, there's one in particular, as far as cheeses are concerned, called Mystic Cheese down in Groton, Connecticut. And Mystic Cheese, Brian Civitello is the cheesemaker there. The amount of life he puts into the milk that he gets, which is small, maybe no more than 40 herd dairy, but the amount of cultures he puts in to a pasteurized milk as opposed to a raw milk. He can craft things and then take them through a process that can get and elicit the flavors that he's looking for, which is, if you can imagine it, a combination between English and Italian, Northern Italian cheeses. And when you have them being made where they are and being under the name of Mystic Cheese, there's something about that combination of brand awareness, of what it elicits as far as an ocean kind of thought. Names a lot of things after whales as well. But the combination of all those flavors kind of elevates all of that pre-knowledge of the name and the expectation. It can meet it and then surpass it. So he's one of the best that I go to all the time. Peter Dixon is another person in the fermentation world as far as cheeses are concerned in Vermont, and he's been around for, as far as cheese making, his whole life. And this goes back to the 60s and 70s. But he does his own culture making and does his own coagulant production as well. But the flavors that he gets are very authentic to where he is in Putney, Vermont. So he's someone that is definitely a guru for a lot of artisan cheesemakers. But I will say one of my favorite products right now that I'm enjoying, that I do buy, is from Atlantic Sea Farms in Maine. Their sea chi, which is a seaweed and kimchi combination. Putting that on anything, again, gives me that same feeling of, I'm so glad I put this on my English muffin that has scrambled eggs and this on top of it, and I'm done. Like
But
this,
it works.
it works beyond what you'd expect, and it makes you feel complete. And that's the thing. Our bodies recognize real, true, authentic life
Yeah.
so much so that you are not just fed and satiated as far as not feeling hungry anymore, but you are satiated for longer. There's this feeling of I am complete for a lot longer, and I don't need to add or have anything else because I'm done.
I'm
Right
so
now.
happy you brought this up because I was hoping we would talk about this, but what you're describing, and I feel like I don't want this to come off like pretentious, but
No,
people who
please.
have not felt this feeling are missing out on the world because
Yeah.
what you're describing is sort of this idea of kokumi, right? Which is this sort of sixth.
Yes.
But calling it a taste is wrong because it's so much more sensory. It kind of like it's absorbed under umami, but it's like this feeling of fullness, but not full because you ate too much. Full of just like you're satisfied. And like I've had food experiences, and maybe you have too, where that feeling doesn't hit you immediately. It hits you a day later, a week later.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy shit. Like I get it. Like I'm happy now. And it's like such an amazing I just don't think we talk about this enough. This idea
Well,
that like when you have education and you have understanding, you can create things that really just mess with your mind in a really cool way.
but it's more of a you're reminded that feeling you've had it before. You're
Yes.
reminded of this completion, and I would call it more of I'm also a bit of a forager as well. And of course, I do follow a lot of folks in the mushroom community. And of course, the idea of mycelium, it's the connectivity in all of land based and maybe even ocean based existence. And it's really just a connection and it's a
Yeah.
sharing of knowledge, of information, of nutrients. But when there is an electrical pulse, everything feels it at the same time. And when you feel you swoon from the food that you have, you're actually connected to everything that it went into it. There is
Yep.
this recognition of this is the best I've ever felt, and I want to do it again, but I'm also really happy it's just contained in this experience. And it's like any experience that you have that you're moved by, you're remembering this overall feeling. You're not remembering one thing. There's this indescribable connectivity that you have suddenly
Yeah.
to that moment in time. And that is exactly what fermentation is. It is a capture of the moment in time that this thing was harvested, put into a vat, created, and then stored or aged or matured. And then finally, when you taste it, it's that moment that it was opened that is never going to be the same. You're going to enjoy the rest of it. It's going to be enjoyed differently. But that first taste is always the capture of that moment in time. And that's something that I'm always looking for. And I'm happy when I get it. And I'm so glad that I can actually look back too, because I can relate it to growing up and having something when you taste it that just it takes you back, just like that moment in Ratatouille, when the critic
Yeah.
finally gets that taste of Ratatouille and it takes him back to being a child. We all have that in some way and we want it again. And I do think there's something about the fermentation method or that is connecting us to history and helping us realize we can survive and we can thrive at the same time.
The mushroom thing is like a perfect and again, like, when you're trying to explain this to someone who maybe is just getting into food or has no connection to food at all, like, you mentioned Ratatouille. I mean, I think pop culture references, I always say that like fermentation and this sort of idea of interconnectedness, just think of it as like the movie Avatar. Everything is like somewhat symbiotic together and people kind of get it, but once you experience it, it is truly different.
Yeah. I've had the exact same experience too in sports as well. That it's not that you win, it's when you are winning or when you are succeeding in your whatever you're doing on the field or on the court or whatever it is, that everybody you're playing with that's on your team, you're moving in a way that is just it's you're not using words, you're just moving in a way that you're all aware of each other at the same time and it's working. It's that feeling that I'm always looking for. And I've had it in the work environment. For example, at Formaggio Kitchen, the team that you build there and the way that it works and the way that you succeed, you just feel as though everything is going the right way. And that's such a unique and feeling that we want all the time, I would
Yes.
imagine.
I don't even know where to go from that. That was
We got
wonderful.
lost in like a nerdy like fermentation like space.
No,
Sorry about that.
it was perfect. It was perfect, and I was just listening, and as you were talking, I was thinking about a dish that I had years ago that gave me that experience that I'm still thinking about to this day, that the restaurant's closed, the chef has moved, and, I can't have it again, and I'm just thinking about all of the reasons why I loved that dish, and I as you were talking, I was thinking too, this is not something that you're just going to eat on the run as you're in the car going out the door. This is something you have to be mindful about and really like take the time, I think, to sit and enjoy and experience those flavors and not be distracted as you're doing it. And I think that that plays into that experience as well.
It does, but you could even democratize it too and bring it down to a level that is enjoyed by the masses. And I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to see a lot more addition of fermented food in worlds that we wouldn't expect. And just to, I guess that would be something that I think about for a future thought as to what we might see as far as trends is, okay, if you can't eat, you know, if you can't eat, let's say, 15 pieces of chicken nuggets from a regular outlet because suddenly the price is skyrocketed and you're not going to spend that, but you would be willing to spend a smaller amount if it came with something else that could make that experience better. Is that an option here? Are we looking at the possibility of I'm going to vote with my dollars, but by doing that, the value has increased because of something that went on top of it? I think there's something there that could happen. And I'm kind of thinking along the lines of a lot of producers asking for hybrid makes of their current products, trying to expand what they currently do, but just changing it a little bit to try to get some more interest and some more unique flavors involved. I think we're going to see it even to the level of high scale retail, which might be a good thing. I mean, one of the things that I've loved to see is in Japan, I know that they started a program around 2021. It might be a little bit before that too, where they were going around to collect all the food waste from restaurants and then taking them to a commissary type area and fermenting the food waste and then creating that into maybe a product that could be resold or reused even by those restaurants as well. That is a wonderful idea, but there's also no governance around it that I think we have in place yet. But could there be a future where our health department employs somebody who is of fermentation production mind, who could help aid the health inspecting team to understand not just the products that are being made, but how to continually educate the public, keep everybody safe, but also help innovate with the food waste that we have? Could that be turned into something better? Whether it's for human consumption, it's for pet consumption, it's for whatever it might be, I do see that as an opportunity. We do have a lot more people in the science, the microbiology sciences as well. Why not continue to help them help everyone at the same time, as opposed to just making products? Could there be a way of actually changing the culture as well?
Well, I mean, I'm excited to see where that goes. I think that there could be some really cool opportunities in the dessert space, which is where I mainly live. And you were talking about unique flavors. And as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, yeah, I can see this in ice creams
Mm-hmm.
and ice cream flavors and headed in that direction. And I mean, I think we might need a part two. There's so much more we didn't even like touch on today, but we do want to thank you for your time and sharing all of your expertise with us today. Where can people find out more about Novonesis?
Yep, novonesis.com, place to go. And of course, we're on Instagram, we're on in LinkedIn, we're everywhere you can possibly look for us. We're there, and we are heavily like focused on biosolutions, and it does go beyond, like I said, food production. It goes into fuel creation. It goes into creating solutions for cleaning as well, but through biosolutions as opposed to chemical. So that's our goal: is to try to create a more sustainable world and do it with life if we can.
That's awesome, Robert. And I know, like, for those who are listening, maybe some of you partook in this a little bit, but you were actually on JBU campus in the spring.
Yes.
You kind of guest spoke in one of our food science labs. So those students, obviously, beyond lucky. Last
If I
question
could say
before.
one thing, if
Yeah,
I could
go
say
for
one
it.
thing about that, the students who were in that innovation class, the ideas they came up with are incredible, and they fit with what I see the future being more not single use make, but multiple use make of a product that also the byproduct of which could be turned into something else. Like that was really their mindset, as to how do we get the most value out of the one thing that we create. And having that come from a culinary world is the most exciting piece for me, because that is where the creativity, the risk taking really needs to happen to move everything forward.
But the important part there too is like, and it's so great to hear you say that, because like people still associate culinary education with just being a chef, and that's so important. But like, the food science program that we have, it's just, there's so much you can do with food at your DNA, like in your core. It's just so it's endless, right? So,
Agreed.
and what we try and do is we give these ideas and let students come up with these ideas. So it's really great to hear you say that. But thank you again for joining us today, and thanks again for coming by campus last spring. And
Absolutely.
again, we'll have to do a part 2 for sure.
We will. Absolutely. Maybe we can get into home fermenting as well.
Oh, I would love that.
Great.
Hang tight.